Yeah, good morning, good day, everybody. We'll begin our third day of stillness and the movement adventure. So today we'll be continuing this theme of stillness and movement. We'll be incorporating stillness and movement with emotions as well as the body. Okay, let's begin. Take a few moments to settle into the space you're in. Allow this arriving and entering into this body and mind and heart to be a gradual process, not rushing, pushing, and being gentle, kind, arriving here and now. Entering into the temple of this body, mind, and heart. Taking our seat. Maybe just these words already evokes a sense of grounded and uplifted. What's the felt sense of a settling into this body, mind, and heart? Feeling and sensing your own experience. Maybe the global sense of the body posture, sitting, lying down. Maybe the contact of the body with the floor, earth. Earthy body resting on earth. Giving this body to the wonder of a gravity. Nothing to do. Naturally settling down. The earthy part of the body is naturally grounding, stabilizing. solid, steady, somewhat still. Resting in the stillness in the body. Maybe just a hint of it, or relatively still. Doesn't have to be some kind of a grand levels of a stillness. It's relatively unmoving, steady, quiet. Sitting like a mountain. This feels resonant. You can simply rest here. Maybe that's enough. Otherwise, you can follow the words. Open to receive the felt sense of the movements of the breath. The stillness highlights the movements. It becomes obvious. Feeling and sensing the sensations of the movements in the body. However they may show up for you. Maybe it's the flow of the breath coursing through the torso. Maybe it's the expansion and contraction as the breathing moves through the body. Nothing to do. We're simply becoming available to the natural movements and the stillness in the body. Other sensations in the body may become felt, visible, energetic field, pulsations, vibrations, tingling, sway, whatever may be available. Dropping into the ocean of the sensations. Feel and sense. Stillness never left us. Sense of aliveness may be here. A deepening sense of a grounding may be here. Notice the quieting and stillness in the knowing, in the feeling and sensing. This is a perfect place to rest in, if you like. If you're willing, open to receive the movements of the mind, maybe waves of emotions. Receiving the waves by resting in the vast stillness, in the knowing, as if you're settling in the bottom of the quiet lake to feel and sense the waves on the surface. Maybe big waves or small waves, and nothing is felt emotionally. Maybe just tenderness, quiet kindness, or aversion, confusion. May have an embodied resonance, heat or the coolness related to the emotions. Resting in the bottom of the lake to feel and sense. Sensations of the body may come in. Thoughts may come in. All of it can be received, felt in the vast quietness. This is a safe place to feel even if it's unpleasant. Letting go of the storytelling of the emotions. Resting in the feeling and sensing. The emotions move. There are emotions in our hearts and minds and in the body. The clouds, storms, and move through the tall mountain. Tall mountain remains unmoving, whether pleasant, unpleasant. Abide in the field of peace and stillness. Abide independent, not clinging to anything in this world. Thank you, everybody. Today, I brought another great woman disciple of the Buddha with us. Her name is Sona. And Sona is very different from the two women I spoke about in the last 2 days. Sona was known in the Buddhist times to be a mother or a housewife with many children. In fact, she had 10 children. This is kind of a little hard for us to relate to in our modern day life. But it's not uncommon in the ancient times, maybe ancient India. And so even maybe it's still so in some part of the world nowadays. I know for myself, my grandmother had 5 children, and many in her generation had 6, 7, 8 children. And women marry very young, and so they often have a lot of kids. What is not common for Sona is that all her kids were doing really well. All 10 children were doing really well. That's kind of special. They had their own families, their businesses were doing well, and they probably had, she probably had grandchildren, and so it was all good. And that's probably not very common. Her husband was a devoted disciple of the Buddha. And at some point, her husband decided to join the monastic sangha with the Buddha. And so that left Sona alone with all her children, all her 10 children. Initially, this wasn't quite an issue. In those days, often the elderlies were cared for by the children, and all 10 of her children were doing really well. So she decided, I'm just going to give away all my possessions and split it over across all 10 families, 10 children's families. And she asked if she could just stay with one child at a time and kind of just rotate this. She didn't have a lot of needs, so bare necessity would do. And that was working well for a while. And back then, there weren't really senior centers. So that was how elderlies often are being cared for. But that didn't last very long. After some time, there began to be disputes, bitterness, complaints, accusations. We probably all know, there probably a bunch of family dramas when in-laws are living with the family. And so the challenges with living with in-laws have stood the test of time from thousands of years ago till now. And so that was the case for Sona. That was saddening. You can imagine, she had given away everything to all her children, and her husband is no longer there to go back to. And so she thought, and there was really no other option but for her to also join the Buddhist monastic sangha. And there was no refuge in the children's homes, or, she also had no home of her own. And so she joined the monastic sangha. That was the only way for her. But this also turns out to be not easy for Sona joining the monastic Sangha of the Buddha. Her path, a monastic path, wasn't like Bada's that I described yesterday, or Patichara's. When she joined the monastic Sangha, she realized all the way up till that point of her life, she had always lived as most of her life were kind of like wife, mother, grandmother. And she had a really hard time to adapt into a monastic Sangha life. And maybe a lot different to live in a monastic Sangha. You meet with the people who you don't really know whether you like them or not don't like them. And there are a lot of different kind of things to do. Maybe the kutis or the cabins need to be fixed, and they needed to learn to fix the cabins and all of this kind of things. And she had no clue about those. And by the time she joined a monastic Sangha, she was already kind of old and weak, wasn't very young. And so she did things her ways, and other nuns did things their ways. And she often get criticized by other nuns. Maybe they were younger, maybe a lot of them were younger, and they would criticize her even on small matters. So that was really tough for her. And so, but Sona, one of the prominent qualities of this woman, Sona, was that she's courageous, strong, determined. She wasn't discouraged by any of these challenges that she's facing. So her sincerity, dedication, and steadfastness led her one step at a time on the Dharma path. So she just kept at it. There is this term that one of my teachers, Philip Moffitt, sometimes would say, called practice the practice, not practicing the results. And so she just gave herself over to practice as much as she could. And she probably didn't have a very good memory, but she set the Buddha's teachings in her memory. She memorized it by heart, and she practiced whenever she remembered to do so. And so it was kind of a wholeheartedness that she went forth with this monastic life. And so definitely not like Bada, who was very quick at grasp the teachings. This was not easy. And she's like this turtle, going one step at a time. But she kept going. And one day, this was what happened as she recounted this in the legends of the Terries, Padana. And so she said, and then the nuns left me alone in the retreat for Buddhist nuns, going off with the instruction, heat up the water while we're gone. You can see, these nuns were a little kind of mean when I read this, they were all going for a retreat but they asked Sona to go heat up the water while they're gone. But this is what happened. She said, then bring water, I poured it into a small pot. After placing it on the hearth, seated, I then kindled my heart. just in the simplicity of those activities, pouring water into the small pot and putting it on the hearth, she sat down and her mind became collected, settled. You can say, entered into a state of a samadhi and mindfulness. So she says, seeing the body's diseasedness, essencelessness, impermanence, throwing off all the defilements, I achieved arahantship. So right in this process, she saw the impermanence, not self, and she let go of all the defilements and became one of the awakened women. Then, coming back, those nuns asked me about the hot water. Through concentration on the fire, I quickly made the flame ignite. Guess it, maybe she had a little psychic power or something. It's kind of fun. And then, astonished, the nuns made that fact available to the Buddha. Hearing it, Buddha, overjoyed, spoke this verse right then. A life lived only for one day, undertaken with a strong effort, is better than a century lived inert, lacking energy. So she was known to be one of the foremost of the nuns who had courageous energy, courageous effort in this whole process, never giving up. Was determined. Her old age, her householder conditioning didn't hinder her capacity to practice at all. She practiced the practice patiently and wholeheartedly, one moment at a time. I was reflecting that in the age and the culture, well, one is constantly pushed for efficiency, speed, patience, and a wholeheartedness can be hard to come by. And yet this can be one of those most important qualities and capacity to cultivate. And through this story, I may also realize that meeting difficulties and challenges are inevitable on our Dharma path. The Buddha experienced immense challenges too before his awakening, including fear and dread, living in the forest, and he faced it. And so did this disciple, Sona. And so will we, if we were to continue on our own Dharma path. And Jack Kornfield said this in his book, The Path with the Heart. As we follow a genuine path of practice, our sufferings may seem to increase because we no longer hide from them and from ourselves. When we don't follow the old habits of a fantasy and escape, we're left facing the actual problems and contradictions of our life. A genuine spiritual path does not avoid difficulties or mistakes, but leads us to the art of making mistakes wakefully, bring them to the transformative power of our heart. And so as we rest, abide in the stillness, openness of our heart, we allow the difficulties, the storms to pass through. We're not to push them away, not to run away from them, but we're cultivating this capacity to allow, to be with the challenges and difficulties of our own life and the lives of all beings. So may this be the transformative power of our heart for the well-being of all beings everywhere. Thank you, everyone, for being here. May you all be well.